Hey listeners, last year was our 15th year of the best in food storytelling. As we head into 2025, we're kicking off a contest in collaboration with the podcast series Feast and Harmony and Sixth Man, where you have the opportunity to win a 4-night cruise for 2 on Chefs Making Waves, a food, wine, and spirits festival at sea. When you donate to HRN, you'll be entered for the chance to win a porthole cabin for 2 on Chefs Making Waves, sailing May 5th through 9th, 2025, from Miami to Cozumel, Mexico on Norwegian Gem. You'll also support another year of great food storytelling with a portion of your donation going toward disaster relief for the food and beverage communities within Western North Carolina and Southern California. This cruise is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for culinary adventurers, featuring top celebrity chefs including Jonathan Waxman, Antonio Lafaso, Robert Irvine, and many, many more. There's a myriad of experiences such as restaurant takeovers, live food and mixology demos, themed parties, and more. To enter your chance to win, please visit heritageradionetwork.org/cruise. Terms and conditions apply. You must be 21 or over to enter. That's heritageradionetwork.org/cruise.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. We've been making cheese in Wisconsin since before we were even a state, which may be one reason why we win so many awards for it. It's what happens when a whole state dreams in cheese. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Cutting the Curd on Heritage Radio Network. I am your host, Joe Salonia. It is already the late February, and so for all you new cheese talents out there listening, I need to mention at the top of the show that the American Cheese Society's American Cheese Education Foundation, ACEF, will be awarding a variety of scholarships to cheesemakers, retailers, chefs, students, and all other cheese professionals. Go to cheesesociety.org/conference/scholarships to learn more and apply before March 31st. If you're not chosen for a scholarship, you'll still receive a discount code for the lowest cost of an ACS conference registration. Also, the Daphne Zeppos Teaching Endowment will start to review applications for their reading awards starting on March 1st through March 31st. To learn more, visit dzte.org to apply. The application is completely revamped and super fun to browse. I highly recommend applying, and don't be too intimidated. Lastly, the Ann Saxelby Legacy Fund is now accepting 2025 apprenticeship applications. Go to annsaxelbylegacyfund.org to learn more. Okay, and now on with our episode. Our next guest is the Vice President of the DiBruno Brothers brand at Wakefern Food Corporation, the nation's largest retailer-owned cooperative. A third-generation grocer, he grew up in the DiBruno Brothers family business and played a key role in transforming it into a beloved Philadelphia brand. Under his leadership, the business evolved into a single store, into 6 locations located in Philadelphia, along with a thriving wholesale operation. He has also been deeply involved in the cheese industry, serving on the American Cheese Society board from 2012 to 2017, and as a board member for the Specialty Food Association since 2016, recognized by the James Beard Foundation for his role in making Philadelphia a world-class food city. He's a true champion of fine food. And on Saturdays, you can always find him at the Italian Market store on 9th Street in Philadelphia, where it all began. Cheese friends, please join me in welcoming a true leader in the food industry and my friend, Emilio Mignucci. Emilio, welcome to Cutting the Curd.
Hey, how you doing, Joe? Thanks for having me, man.
Well, it's great to have you here. And if I'm not mistaken, have you ever been on this? Have you ever been on Cutting the Curd before?
I have not. Listen often, but I haven't been on the program.
Okay, well, welcome. If it's your first time, I was happy to ask you that question. I just wanted the audience to understand it's your first time in the years you've been in the business, first time on Cutting the Curd. But we want to get chatting about you. And so there's plenty of new listeners. There's some listeners that have been following the food industry. But for those who may not be familiar, We want to can you tell us a little bit about yourself? And I also know 2024 was a big year for you. You became a grandfather, but hey now, grandfather now.
Yeah, man.
But can you give us a little bit of
happy, very proud.
Congratulations, as you should be. Can you give us a brief history, though, of DiBruno Brothers?
Oh, I sure can. I mean, listen, I grew up in in the business. My grandparents started the business back in 1939. They came over from Italy around the turn of the century with, Danny and Joe, and then, they found their wives, they got married, and they were raising children. Once they got married, they opened their own store. Like I said, was 1939 in the Italian market in South Philly. At that time, South Philadelphia was the landing spot. That area, South Philadelphia, the Italian market, was the landing spot for all the Italian immigrants. And it's pretty cool because all up and down those little side streets where I grew up, between Kimball and League Street, with my grandparents. As I got older, I started to see, like my aunts and uncles and cousins, everybody buying houses up those streets. So like we were all living like within 3 blocks of each other. There was probably, I don't know, 7 families, right?
Wow.
But,
classic.
Yeah, it is pretty classic.
Kind of like Moonstruck, but in Philadelphia.
Yeah, kind of like that. When I watch movies like that, it just resonates. And so
sure.
my grandparents opened this little store in the Italian market, just really to, supply the products and the goods that they were used to getting and having in Italy. But, at the time they had to, source stuff locally, like within, between Philly and New York. There wasn't a whole lot of importing going on back then in the 40s, early 40s and 50s. And so, they had this little 300 square foot store that they made homemade stuff. One of the things that they were known for was they used to make alcohol. Liquors.
They used to make alcohol.
yeah.
Okay.
Liquors and stuff. And so you had to know to ask, because, they had the pasta by the pound. It was like bulk pasta. And, they would have, a couple of, cheeses and salamis that they made, soppressata, as they would call them. And, over the years, they spent the first 30 years, 28 years working that store and developing the business. But my grandfather, Danny, wound up taking his first trip back home to visit his family. It was in the early 60s, 63, 64.
Uh-huh.
And when he did that, it turned out a buddy of his that was from his hometown near Pescara had moved up north to Switzerland and was working for a company that was making Emmentaler, oddly enough. And, he connected with him. And this is how, he first started importing cheese. He came home from that trip and he was like, he was thinking to himself, like, how could I differentiate myself here in Philadelphia? Because let's face it, in the 60s, what was happening was that supermarkets were starting to come around, the A&P, the Acme's, Superfresh, stores like that was able to service everything to people and sell it cheaper than what my grandparents could. And so they had this little store that, my aunts and uncles all worked at as well. And, my grandfather came home from that trip and thought to himself, I got to do something to differentiate myself and really stand out. That's why you see on our shirts, it says culinary pioneers, because I think back to my grandfather, Danny, and, there's a guy with nothing more than a 3rd grade education that just, started thinking about like different ways to make his business a viable business. And he knew he had this unique ability to know and understand that, you have to evolve in business. And that set him on the road to start importing. And, by early 70s, people were traveling to Europe a lot, going to France mainly. And he rode that wave, started bringing in cheeses like, after the Emmentaler, started bringing in cheeses like French Brie, Edam, Gouda, things like that people were seeing abroad. And
right, that was a cheese back then. French Brie. That was the only title you needed probably
really
back
was.
then to really sell something. That was like really seeing
it
the
was
Hope
huge.
Diamond.
Yeah, it was like seeing the Hope Diamond, you know. And the funny thing is, like in the 70s, I was born in 67. So that store, I'd have to pass that store every day, you know, when I was 6, 7 years old to go to school. And, you know, me and my buddies, my friends, my brothers, aunts, my brothers, my cousins, and everybody and friends used to all just walk to school that way. And we'd stop in the store to see my grandparents setting up, and they'd give us breakfast. And then we'd come back during school and have lunch. And then, you know, we'd hang out with them because they'd work, you know, through dinner. You know, like they close for like a quick meal and then go back and just work the store till like 9, 10 o'clock at night, right? Because they lived upstairs. And it was just, you know, we were just so used to it and so used to being in that store. I mean, it was just like
that was your house and everything.
Yeah,
your family.
Yeah,
I've been on that upstairs. It's really a small office space right now. But you're saying that was the living quarters all up in there.
Yeah, two floors of it. So it was a second floor. Then there's a third floor.
Okay,
right. And so
still
in that area where you see the office space, that used to be like a little kitchen.
Gosh.
Yeah.
I could kind of imagine that when I'm thinking about it now. And I mean, so many people live small like that. And you know, if you go back to visit Europe and cheesemakers that are living in their dairies, many of them live in smallish quarters. And it's just kind of a testament to the hard work and dedication to really the food that they were convinced that they wanted to work with to just make that happen, make their living doing good hard work that they loved. So I imagine with all of this, you got to work a lot with your parents as you grew up. You're alongside your aunts, your uncles, maybe your grandparents as well. Did you find yourself like reflecting on some of their drawing wisdom from them or quotes from them, from things they used to say and give you like lessons about how to approach things?
Yeah, listen, 100%. Like, you know, you grew up with them, and quite honestly, like they were, you know, I mean, it was family, right? Like my aunts and uncles, you know, who were they were my great aunts and great uncles. So, you know, my grandfather, his brothers and sisters and cousins and everybody that worked there. And then the store kind of skipped a generation when we took it over. Like my parents didn't work there, and my cousins' parents didn't work there because the store was too small, right? So it skips a generation by the time we came along.
Oh, wow.
Because that generation, that first generation, they didn't want their children to work in the store. They wanted them to go to university, go to college, and you know, become something, right? And so that's what happened with that whole generation, right? Which is why it skips. But, you know, the stuff that you learn, you know, and I'll just fast forward to when we took over the family business in '89, like a couple of things that my grandfather said to us when he handed us the keys, you know, one thing was you know, the customers choose to come here. They don't have to come here. So you need to treat them with the respect that you want to be treated with, right? So, you know, in another sense, like in his broken English and Italian, he would say, you know, they come to the door, you have to teach them about the food, like our culture and everything that we do. And so, you know, we really took that to heart. And it was interesting because customers would come in, and I remember being a kid, 7, 8, 9 years old, 10 years old, and hanging in the store and watching my grandfather make people happy, give them samples, give them tastes of, you know, brie or Gouda or eat them something Emmentaler. And the customers would just be so happy. And I can remember thinking to myself, I could do what he does. I could give people samples and get paid for it. Like I could do that. Like my 10-year-old mind was like, yeah, like that's all there is to it. But they did teach us a lot about stuff like that. Then, you know, one other thing he said, you know, when we took over the business was you can't pay people to care. When you find somebody who cares enough to be part of your business and want to help you, then like those are the people you really need to take care of. So, I mean, he had a lot of good things. And, you know, even today, you know, I find myself when I'm behind the counter saying some of the little sayings that he used to say to the customers, you know, about, you know, tasting, eating, celebrate, you know, with your family. Life, every day should be a celebration was, you know, was one of his mantras. And what we do, it's not rocket science. It's just, put really great food in front of people and, communicate around the table.
Yeah. Any impression I ever got when I visited the 9th Street location is it's kind of like a celebration. I don't know how to explain it. I mean, I have an emotional connection because I visited back around 1989. So it's really funny because that was the first time. That was the first year I got to visit. So you're saying the keys were literally passed from your grandparents to your generation. Might have been you and brothers or cousins.
My brother, my cousin, myself. Yeah.
Okay. And so there's something sweet about that because, our parents have a different story about their parents, but as far as like grandchildren and their grandparents,
for sure.
we put them up on a pedestal, right? So that has like a different kind of purity to it. I really enjoy knowing that. I didn't know that about the DiBruno story, actually. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, listen, think back to your own grandparents and what you relish most about them. And I'll tell you, like my grandfather, Danny, was always so open and welcoming. Like, he was the kind of guy, I know we talk about it now in today's society, like making room for everyone at the table. But I'll tell you, my grandfather, if somebody didn't have a place to go for a holiday, he brought them to the house. And, my grandmother she never didn't have enough food. Like there was always more food than you ever needed. Right.
Yeah.
And so it was the one thing he could do for people, is just, welcome them in. And he really relished that fact, like get people around the table, no matter who they are. And you'll see that you can make them happy. You could have really great conversations and you could start to really enjoy and celebrate life together.
So it's this distillation of family values and passion and goodwill and just all overarching celebration of food, which is like always to me felt like it sounds like and still are the tenets of how you operate and what you what are the pillars, if you will, of how you work. And
it really is. It really is.
Yeah.
I remember when we took over the business, maybe because he stayed with us for about, 6-8 months before he passed away, and worked the store, just 2 days a week, he would come and hang out, and I remember one time saying to my grandfather, Pop, in Italian, like, why is our prosciutto is $5 more a pound than our neighbor's prosciutto? And he said two things to me. He said, number one, the more time you're worried about your neighbor, the less time you worry about your business. And number two, he said, what I try to do is just find the best. And if I put the best out there, I let the food speak for itself, then you never have to make an excuse for it. And, that is another one of those tenets that we have never shied away from. At the DiBruno Brothers, like we just, if we could upgrade a product, I don't care if it's an olive oil, vinegar, a cheese, like if we could do it, we're going to do it. And we're going to let the customers speak to, if they want it or not, but we always try to give them that option, like this is the best. And since then, I got to tell you, since we took over the family business, the only prosciutto di Parma that we've ever sold is still the same prosciutto di Parma that my grandfather sold.
Oh man, that's amazing. And going back not too far, you don't have to go back too far, but the late 80s, even the 90s, my experience of when I'd shop for an item like that, and it could have just been because I didn't know enough at the time, but like there was basically, if you got the prosciutto di Parma, there was only one kind, and it was di Parma, and you didn't go any farther. You had the not kind that wasn't from there, and the other one that was from there, and you thought it was, if it was called that, then that was it, and you didn't realize if you were a merchant in that realm, there's many different producers, how you cut it, how you trim it, how you slice it, all that factors into, how the producer trims it and how they source. There's so much more, right? But in these early years of still like gourmet food education and culture in our own country, that was quite a mountain that you climbed there, just even that one item alone, nonetheless with cheese. And I'm going to guess how many at your first location, and you go to the second location. What year did the second location open, and what years do you think where the bells start going off about when it was time to start cultivating more of a cheese collection?
Well, so when we took over the business in 1989, we had the one store. That was it, and it was me, my brother, my cousin. Now, a couple of my great aunts had stayed on with us. to help us through the transition, and because they knew all the customers, and because they really were the heartbeat of DiBruno Brothers, along with my grandfather and his brother Joe, my great uncle Joe. But when they retired, they my aunts didn't want to retire, and they stayed on. They were like, if you guys will have us, we'll stay. The three of them, Rita, Edith, and Angie, and they were iconic in the Italian market. Customers would come in, and they would, first thing in the morning, they'd be making breakfast. And so they'd share breakfast with customers. They'd make lunch. They'd share lunch with customers. And they'd make a little pasta before they left at the end of the day. Wow. And we'd share it with customers. It's so funny. Customers would come in knowing. And they just were so awesome about it. And, without them, I don't know that the transition would have been as easy, because we didn't know anything. We were 22 years old. We took over the business. And when I tell you we knew nothing about retail and how to do it. You think it's easy when you're a kid. You see them bag up product and, collect money and then give change. But our product was product that customers would come in and they'd want to know about. They'd want us to tell them why they're buying it, what it is, And for me and my brother, we were around it all the time, so we just knew it and expected it to be great, but customers didn't always know it. And that's about the time where we started doing a lot of business with restaurants. Now, chefs would shop the Italian market every day, and they'd come in, and because my grandparents had this little focus on cheese, they became known as the House of Cheese. And so when we took it over, they might have had 50, 60 cheeses that they rotated in and out, Havartis and Esrom and Goudas and all kinds of stuff, right? But then when we took it over, we just took that name, the House of Cheese, and ran with it, and just started, I just got so infatuated with cheese at an early time. I guess it was probably around 92, 93. There was this little importer here in Philadelphia that came to my store one day and, started showing me cheeses and invited me to his warehouse. And I went to his warehouse, and next thing you know, I'm bringing in all these, crazy raw milk cheeses from France and Germany and, Belgium. And at the time, there weren't all those rules and regulations around importing cheese, raw milk especially.
The golden ages.
Yeah, and we were getting some crazy stuff. We were getting some real Malois, Epoisse was really, really funky, stuff that you don't see today. You literally got to be in Europe to get some of that stuff. Now, I know Epoisse comes here, but it's different than what we used to get, honestly. Yeah. And crazy goat cheeses, and so we started introducing that stuff, and it started drawing more of the restaurant trade to us. And that allowed us to be able to bring in more new, unique, and different cheeses. And then, we followed that up with more new, unique, different charcuterie items. And we transitioned from just having Italian stuff to having all Mediterranean stuff, Spanish, French, Italian, Greek. We had these barrel feta, right? You'd get this monstrous barrel, this, 50-gallon barrel, wooden barrel of feta that you pry the lid off, and then you have to reach in and get these big chunks of feta that are aged or cured in these barrels. And we put our hand in there, up to our arm, and pull it out and just sell slabs of feta to people. Yeah. It was crazy times, man. And we'll never see those days again,
It's cool to think about and inspiring. But hey, Emilio, let's put a pin in this just for a second. Want to hear more about this part of the whole DiBruno story right after this break.
This episode is brought to you by Wisconsin Cheese. There's a reason when you think of Wisconsin, you think cheese. Cheese is a huge part of Wisconsin's history and future. In Wisconsin, the state of cheese, the tradition of cheese-making excellence began 180 years ago, before Wisconsin was recognized as a state. Immigrants traveled to settle in this lush green hills of Wisconsin, bringing their cheese-making traditions with them. These storied skills, combined with the freshest milk available, created a cheesemaking culture that is uniquely Wisconsin. Wisconsin's 1,200 cheesemakers, many of whom are third and fourth generation, continue to pass on old world traditions while adopting modern innovations in cheesemaking craftsmanship. Find your next favorite cheese at wisconsincheese.com.
Okay, cheese friends, we are back with Emilio Mignucci, Vice President of DiBruno Brothers brand at Wakefern Food Corporation here. Emilio, we were just talking about the barrel feta and all the old-fashioned ways that the cheeses were being brought in from an old merchant in the Philly area, but you're really only going back to the early 90s when your cheese program exploded, if you will, into becoming more of the house of cheese. But I always like to ask a quick question. What was your favorite cheese combo growing up that you still love today, but not counting Parmigiano Reggiano, because that's almost too obvious of a one to mention. But maybe you have a different one anyway.
Well, I'm going to tell you, like growing up, like provolone was always in our house. Sharp provolone, Orecchio provolone. It's just always, and so that's still in our stores. We still sell it, and I'm still never without it. It's always just like it's comforting, right? It's just something that I go to.
Oh man,
sharp provolone and a piece of bread. Throw some prosciutto on there, you're good to go.
I grew up with the provolone too. We just called it cheese though. I didn't know what it was. What it was. My grandfather would pull a wedge out of the fridge, and he had this gnarly, weird knife that he used to sharpen in a strange way. It had a really weird shape to it, and he would just carve a piece off to me, and I would eat that and be a happy kid. But yeah, so provolone, that's great. And then you're on the street too, where they make all those amazing sandwiches, and one of them is the roast pork with the broccoli rub and the provolone. I have to come back for one of those.
Best.
I tried to make one on Super Bowl, and it came out okay, but it's not the same as being on 9th Street. Nothing like being on 9th Street for that. But 100%. So let's fast forward. When did it get to the point? If you give us some timelines, like how many stores are you in the 90s? Like when did you get to six locations? When did that? How long did it take to get to 6?
Well, it took us a while. We opened our second location down right about 99, I'll say, which is 99. We opened our second location, which was a store in Center City. It was on 18th Street. There was a cheese merchant there who couldn't make it work, and he asked us to take over his business and operate that. He said, if you turn into the DiBruno Brothers, you'll do well, because everybody that walks by my store that I try to sell, they say, no, I go to DiBruno's. And so we did. We took over his store. A hell of a nice guy. We took over his store in Rittenhouse, and we opened that in 99. Then we realized we should take a lot of trips to New York for inspiration, and we go visit the Balducci's and Adina DeLucas, and got to meet Grace Balducci when she opened Grace's Market, and thought, between her and Rusty, we just would go and introduce ourselves. And, they told us, well, listen, prepared foods, man, that's what you got to get into. If nobody's doing that in Philly, you guys should be doing. And so that's what drove us into the prepared food part of our business. And so we opened another little store next to the shop that we had on Rittenhouse. It was a prepared food store. We called it Pronto. And we had a little commissary kitchen because we bought a little store in the Italian market next to the cheese shop that we had, which is now our bottle shop, our beer and wine shop. So we put a little kitchen in there, and we used to cook all the food for that.
Wow. So you're into the 90s, into the 2000s. Yep. You're when did the national like you got the product lines too with your brands on it? Did that happen in the middle of all this? Did that happen?
Yeah, it kind of all happened. So here's the thing about very entrepreneurial people. Sometimes we're all over the place and we just do a bunch of stuff and and then figure it out later on. But while all this is going on, I remember my grandparents had all these relationships with people in Europe, and I was communicating with them. But at the same time, I was starting to get this newsletter from the American Cheese Society, which was a paper newsletter, came out quarterly, in the late 90s. And I remember reading something by Ari Weindwig, when he was the president of the American Cheese Society. And I said, well, this is something cool. And I'd start thinking about those folks and then the people in Italy that were making cheeses that my grandparents knew. And I said, you know what? Let me go over there, fly to Italy. And I went to one of the food shows. And I went to the food show and I just fell in love with this whole culture of, these really cool cheeses being made. And I said, well, how do I import these things? And I started working with an importer. He taught me some stuff and I started doing it on my own and, bringing cheeses in directly. And then one thing led to another. At that same time, late 90s, I meet a woman named Deborah Dickerson who changed my life. Right.
Mm-hmm. She's changed many of our lives. She's amazing.
She is brilliant. Right. And so she came to me and said, I was like late 90s. And she said to me, what are you doing with that Stilton? Because we had, just a regular Stilton. She said, you should taste this. I'll bet you can sell this. And she makes me taste Colston Bassett Stilton. And that was it. Ever since I tasted that first time, that's the only Stilton we've ever carried. And it's funny because Deborah was, it was Daphne Zeppos. They had a company called 3Ds Importing or something, and they worked with Neal's Yard Dairy. Yeah. And we became an importer of Neal's Yard Dairy, or working with Neal's Yard Dairy, and helping work through the process of how to get the product to us and on our counters. And so, she had my head spinning and introduced me to Ari and the American Cheese Society. And now I'm just going wild, right? It's like my senses are going crazy. And, I'm going to Italy and I see product. I said, wow, if I could get really great olive oil at a great price and bring it all in and just sell it to my customers, then I don't have to compete with supermarkets like my grandfather, right? I'm thinking, the way my grandfather was thinking, you can't have stuff that the supermarket's selling because they could always undersell you, right? Because they're just looking for a small growth. We need more because we're a customer service business and yada, yada, yada. So that brought me down that journey. And then, I'm sorry, long story short, but then we were selling, my grandparents made these cheese spreads because they never wanted to waste cheese. And so these cheese spreads.
So the cheese spreads came out of not wanting to waste cheese. That's really what I was wondering about at one point. Because he would make this, by the time we took over the business, there were 12 flavors, but the first one he made was one called Abruzzi, from the region of Italy that the family came from. And not having more than a third grade education, they never spelled Abruzzi the right way. It was Abbruzze, right? So we kept that spelling for the cheese, but he used to make this spread and he would mix these cheeses in and just spice it up. It would be peppery, and so people didn't know. So kind of like a form of fromage fort. Yeah, fromage fort. One of the best tricks in the book for those that are out there. Google it, 100%. Everybody.
Yeah. So that's what he did. And then he started to make these other flavors and stuff. And when we took over the business, we cut back a little bit to nine of the best-selling spreads. And we were making them in 40-pound batches on the second floor of that store.
Wow.
When you're there, you've seen it. The mixer is still there. It's too big. Yeah. We can't get it out. We have no idea how they got it up there. But this mixer is massive.
Yeah. I love it. So let's put an overview here. I'm imagining the challenge of you fast forward a little bit more. You're at the 6 gourmet locations with extensive cheese counters, a distribution center for some of these products to chefs, wholesale accounts, catering services. You have a wine and beer program. You're doing events. Maybe you're managing relationships with numerous specialty vendors and some of the best in the world. Like you mentioned earlier, Neal's Yard Dairy being one of them. And while importing your own items from Italy, along with overseeing this line of cheese spreads, accompaniments, cured meats, maybe you got your name on, olive oils. And then, fast forward a couple more years, you throw a pandemic into the mix. Let's throw one of those in there. Let's throw a pandemic in there. And so I don't even know how I wrap my head around it all, honestly. So
believe me.
Well, could you tell us, I know the audience wants to hear the key challenges you faced in operating DiBruno locations and distributions in Philadelphia, especially coming out of the pandemic.
Yeah. Listen, I'll tell you, Philadelphia's always been great to us, to DiBruno's. They've always been very forgiving, our customers. Whenever we made a mistake, they always, let us know. But, Philadelphia is very loyal to their own. So they really helped us grow up. We grew up in the business. We grew up with them. The pandemic, we got through 2008 when the economy collapsed and it was, everything went to hell. And, we got through that. And that's when we just opened our big flagship store in 2005. And so that Rittenhouse store being the biggest store with a restaurant upstairs and such, we were nervous. But we got through that. We figured it out. The pandemic comes along and it posed a whole new set of challenges because with the pandemic, social injustice just bubbled up, right? And it just became this this driving force behind the millennials and the Gen Zs and the way that they wanted to be heard. And so, like my grandfather always said, you have to learn to evolve, and you have to evolve with your customers. But these challenges were real, and sales start to fall, to drop. And when you're in a position like we were in, I mean, you named it all. 6 retail stores, import and distribution. I mean, a lot of distribution. We had a $20 million distribution business. Our stores are doing $60 million a year in sales. The events and catering, e-commerce, corporate gifting. I mean, everything that we were doing, we realize now at this point we're spread so thin, and when employees that are predominantly creatives and of this generation, the Z's and the millennial, they want to be heard in a way that it just, they didn't need to work because the pandemic taught them they could stay home, but we were always open and we were struggling with staff and everything else in all aspects of our business. And these pose some major challenges. We gave everybody raises because we thought it was the right thing to do, but at the same time, we never raised our prices in our stores. We thought, well, we're very entrepreneurial. We always bounce back. We need to do this for our customers as well. So we raised everybody's pay. And we didn't increase retail prices. We sucked up all the margin, which went to nothing because there were supply chain issues and everything else that was going on. So we weren't profiting equivalent to what we were spending, and not just on our employees, but on the product as well. And so that was a whole nother challenge that brought us to where we are today. We wind up having some, our banks got nervous because the one bank we were with was struggling and getting ready to go bankrupt after all that. And so they called us on some loans that they typically usually just term out for the next year. Mm-hmm. And we paid off by the end of the year. Mm-hmm. And so we were caught, really with our pants down and had to find a partner. And in doing so, in Philadelphia, we have lots of friends, lots of customers, and the Browns found me, Jeff Brown specifically, who is part of the Wakefern co-op of retailers. They're one of the major ShopRite retailers, ShopRite supermarket retailers in Philadelphia. And he shops in the stores, and he offered his help. And the only way that we could do it, or that he was going to get the blessing from his company, was if we became part of their group under Browns. And so that's when we said, you know what, it's either do this or risk, going out of business in some aspects of our businesses, or putting some aspects of our businesses out, and then, good people losing jobs. And we didn't want to do that. So we went along with this, and so my retail stores are run in Philadelphia by the Browns family. So they have 11 ShopRites, they have 2 Fresh Grocers, and they have the 6 DiBruno Brothers retail stores. Now, for that, I am part of the corporate entity, which is known as Wakefern. Wakefern is the name of the corporate company that all of the 49 owners in the co-op of all the other stores, they have 368 stores or something like that. So all 49 members or member families own Wakefern. So I work for the corporate company, the major company, to now continue the DiBruno brand, the CPG that we have distributed nationally, because none of the member families, are allowed to have a distribution because it's in their bylaws. Being the largest retail food co-op in the world, that's one of their bylaws. So no member family can have their own distribution business. It has to be Wakefern. So that's why I had to transition with Wakefern for that. And so I can stay in control of the DiBruno brand, because they needed somebody who had the vision for the brand and the products, because we don't simply just white label a product, take a product that's being made and put the DiBruno name on it. What I do is I work with the makers to make it specifically a DiBruno item, unique to DiBruno. Yeah. And, so like the supper salads that are being made for us are my grandfather's recipes. And, I work with different co-packers to make different recipes that we had, like our cheese spreads and supper salads and,
cheese accompaniments
and the jams and the honeys. Right?
Yeah, how many items are in this range that you'd call this DiBruno branded
There's about
range?
65, 70 items that we distribute nationally. We're in 44 states with our distribution.
Wow.
I mean, crackers, our crostini crackers. My family is in Abruzzo, Italy, and little town of Teramo. And the next little town over, there's a little town called Atri, where a buddy of mine, Danilo, is from. And he's the guy who, I partnered with 24 years ago to make our crostinis. And now we import crostinis that are made by him, about 50 containers a year that are fluid loaded, like 3,500 cases on a container. And we distribute those all around the country.
Wow. It's so cool that your family originated from there, and now you're giving business to that area again and kind of closing a circle, like a little circle of cheese life, if you will, or, products that through the generations.
It's always what we've done. When we think local, we think globally local. So we call it globally local, and find small families and makers that, because I have friends in Italy that do manufacturing and make great stuff. Like the guy who makes our panettone. It's like, he's sustainable and uses, great ingredients, and, it's all clean, and, but his family is being sustainable, and his town, because he's putting them all to work. And so all that matters when we put a product together.
Yeah, I think most listeners can get behind the local vibe. I mean, we like small production, or we like to know the name of the person who made our, like my uncle always said, hey, Joe, you always know the name of the guy who made your sausage. It's a good rule of thumb for life. I'm like, okay, all right, Uncle Louie, that's a good thing to know. But like, if you think about it, if you can name the producer of any one thing, it's usually going to mean it's a pretty nice little small production, beautiful product. It's a good qualifier, a good place to start.
100%.
And the hometown brick and mortar DiBruno stores, they're still doing great. Like, is the Italian Market on 9th Street still popping?
Yeah, I mean, the Italian Market store is great. It's still my favorite store to go work behind the counter. I mean, it's because it's so small and intimate, and you get to do everything, between cheese or charcuterie, and find the olive oil or the vinegar or whatever condiments to go with it. Yeah. I mean, that's
all right there.
It's where I live and breathe. It's my heart and soul.
I could totally understand. I'm just an outsider, scrappy culinary school guy from New Jersey, and I feel an emotional connection. I can't even imagine what it's like for you. So, this is such an iconic 9th Street, Italian Market location. The street itself is iconic. You have the Rocky with the catching the orange and the jogging, and you have then you're actually there, your store. But this DiBruno Brothers 9th Street Market is this concept, this iconic name or vision? Is this going to be a store within a store concept that you have planned with the new group? Is that something that you would do?
Yeah, I mean, it's something absolutely that's on the table. We're working on test marketing a couple of them right now, and by the end of this year, we'll have a good idea and a good grip as to how many and which stores it should go in. But listen, our goal, my vision is to bring great food, great product to as many people as we can, and as long as Wakefern and the folks here are loving me and my vision and what I want to do, and they are. I mean, they've been great to me, so I feel very supported, and I feel really, really great that we got another. I don't know. I mean, I guess they don't want to hear me say this. At least 10, 12 years of me to do this. Yeah, they'd probably rather have 25 or 30, but I mean, we'll see how it goes. And I feel good. My son, my cousin, we still have Minucci's and DiBruno's working in the business, and
yeah, you have an adult son. Philly. We should say, right? Obviously, you're a grandfather. You have an adult son. Yeah. One of them is
Both
in the
my
business.
sons got married within the last 3 years, and the older one is working his way to managing all of the DiBruno stores, and my cousin Tommy is doing the merchandising for the stores and selecting the products. So I don't have to worry about those two aspects of the stores. Yeah, because it's in good hands because they both grew up in the business with us. So. They have their own vision of what the next 30, 40 years looks like. And they're on the right track. I got to tell you,
So you're an incredible ambassador, obviously, for DiBruno Brothers, but you're also an ambassador for, like I said in the beginning of the show, for fine foods and for your champion of cheese, your champion of small producers. And it sounds like that, no matter where you go or whatever happens, that will remain unchanged. I think I'm convinced. And that's what, yeah. But, we're just about out of time here, Emilio. I mean, we could go on, but I got to say, we got to probably wrap it up. But thank you for joining me today on Cutting the Curd to talk about all your work in the cheese world and the DiBruno sphere and hear the whole story about the DiBruno Brothers world and in your growing Mignucci family.
Yeah. Listen, I'm blessed. And believe me, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. It's, it's been a blast doing what I do. I'll tell you, 35 years of doing this, I haven't worked a day in my life.
Right on. Well, let's get that on a shirt. I love it. All right, cheese friends. Thank you again, Emilio. All right, cheese friends. You can follow Emilio on Instagram at DiBruno Brothers. That's DiBruno BROS, and at CheeseMe33. That's Cheese MEE33. And you could follow us on Instagram at Cutting the Curd, and you could follow Heritage Radio Network at Heritage_Radio, and follow me at Sting Chef. Please hit the subscribe button to Cutting the Curd via Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. Also, if you enjoy the show, please give us a glowing 5-star review. It will really help us broaden our audience. Okay, thanks again, everyone. And if you love someone, send them cheese.
Cutting the Curd is powered by Simplecast. Thanks for listening to Heritage Radio Network, food radio supported by you. Keep in touch at heritageradionetwork.org/subscribe.